at the hyper-local level of state policing in Nigeria, and then are going to progressively zoom all the way out to these massive transnational continent-wide military strategies. It's this brilliantly complex spectrum, and we're going to break down the core arguments, the biggest hurdles, and the on-the-ground realities step by step.
Okay, let's dive into this. Here is our roadmap for today. We've got 3 main stops. 1. The state police debate. 2. Seeking terrorism justice. And 3. A regional standby force.
Starting us off with Section 1, the state police debate, looking specifically at devolution versus centralization. Right now, Nigeria is right in the thick of a highly contested and pivotal conversation about decentralizing its police force. It's a classic structural debate, right? Do you keep power totally consolidated at the federal level, or do you hand it down to individual states? Well, to kick this off, a representative for the Inspector General of Police, the IGP, recently stated that Nigeria is not mature for state police. It is a really bold, controversial statement, and it immediately sparked intense debate. In fact, experts looking at this have actually likened this whole maturity argument to historical debates from decades ago, back when critics questioned whether Nigeria was politically mature enough for independence. It raises a massive question for us. What exactly is the metric for maturity when it comes to self-governance and security?
But look, before any changes can actually happen, there's a huge legal hurdle in the way. Section 214 of the Nigerian Constitution explicitly mandates a single exclusive federal police force for the nation. So amending this, it isn't just a simple stroke of a pen. It requires a rigorous concurrent agreement between the National Assembly and a majority of the 36 state houses. It's a deliberately rigorous constitutional process designed to make sweeping structural changes difficult.
Now, what's really interesting about this is the centralized police force argues that before decentralization is even put on the table, some glaring logistical gaps have to be fixed. They point to severe shortages across the board: manpower, operational equipment, basic arms and ammunition. Plus, there is a massive deficit in modern tech, things like communication networks, forensics, and drones. So, from the centralized perspective, these foundational nuts and bolts issues must be completely resolved before even thinking about fracturing the system into 36 different state entities. But, as you can probably guess, the debate goes way beyond logistics. It bleeds right into political power. The IGP actually fears that state governors could start acting like local emperors, abusing their new police power against political rivals. Plus, there are major concerns about jurisdictional conflicts and the stark reality that a lot of states already struggle to fund basic services, let alone a whole police force. On the flip side, critics argue that federal agencies suffer from the exact same political biases and overreach anyway. And furthermore, state task forces and local vigilantes are already operating as de facto state police right now, just without any of the official legal framework to hold them accountable. Despite all those strong objections from the Central Police Authority, there's a prevailing sentiment among analysts today that the political train has left the station. Why? Well, because back in mid-February, the president and the 36 state governors already sat down and reached an agreement supporting the general concept of state policing. So the political momentum for structural change is moving incredibly fast, regardless of the institutional pushback we're seeing. It is absolutely crucial to understand that implementing this is not just a simple binary choice of yes or no. State police actually exists on a spectrum of typologies. It ranges from somewhat semi-centralized systems all the way to an absolutely decentralized model where states have total, unchecked control over their funding, jurisdiction, and arms. So the real work ahead for Nigeria is figuring out exactly which specific model on this broad spectrum actually fits the nation's unique needs. Okay, having explored the incredible complexities of local policing, we naturally arrive at what happens next. When law enforcement actually captures those accused of the most heinous crimes, how do you ensure fair trials for terrorism suspects? This brings us straight to the national judicial stage.
Moving into Section 2, Seeking Terrorism Justice, and specifically the trials in Kainji.
We are shifting gears now from the local police beat up to the national level. With official legal trials for Boko Haram suspects commencing in Kainji, the state is attempting to walk a phenomenally thin tightrope. On one hand, the foundational legal doctrine of the presumption of innocence demands transparent, fair court trials, even for accused terrorists. But on the other hand, the state is battling massive public skepticism. There's deep, lingering trauma among the victims, widespread rumors and conspiracy theories of prison escapes, and just a general, profound distrust of government de-radicalization programs. It is an incredibly emotionally charged atmosphere for any judge or prosecutor to work in.
So, the crucial point is really understanding this core conundrum. While public anger is entirely palpable and understandable, the state cannot adopt an extrajudicial approach. You simply cannot just kill thousands of captured suspects or penitent militants. It is legally and morally impossible. Therefore, despite the immense difficulty, creating transparent courts and functional reintegration programs is absolutely mandatory. It's the only real path to building public trust and legally closing this very dark chapter. But trials really only deal with the aftermath of terrorism, right? It begs an even larger, perhaps more important question. Are regional leaders actually doing enough to address the root causes of terrorism before needing to put boots on the ground? Let's zoom out one final time and look past national borders entirely.
Bringing us to Section 3, a regional standby force and West African security. Now we are looking at West African security as a unified whole. Leaders from Nigeria, Togo, and Ghana have been pushing hard for a unified continental standby military force to deter current and future insurgencies. But military might isn't a magic silver bullet. Experts point out that the root drivers of instability have to be confronted first. We're talking about a fundamental crisis of state-level governance, where basic services like healthcare and education have essentially collapsed in certain areas. You combine that governance void with massive illegal mining operations financed by foreign money, and you create a perfect breeding ground for terrorism that militaries alone simply cannot fix. Let's move to and see how this builds over time, because the concept of an African standby force is actually what some experts call a romantic idea that's been championed for decades. If we look back, we see Kwame Nkrumah's early OAU proposals way back in the 1960s. Then we see the ECOMOG interventions in places like Liberia in the 1990s. And that brings us right up to the present day with this renewed push for an ECOWAS standby force to tackle modern jihadist threats. And this brilliantly illustrates the real issue here. There is a massive gap between theory and execution. The hurdles to actually mobilizing this continental force today are staggering. First off, there's a severe chronic lack of funding. Then you have a deeply rooted linguistic divide that massively complicates ground operations between French and English-speaking militaries. But most critically of all, the regional body itself is currently fracturing, highlighted by the recent and dramatic departure of Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso from ECOWAS. To really understand the depth of that fracture, you have to look at the specific criticisms leveled by those breakaway nations that, by the way, have recently experienced military coups themselves. They officially claimed that when they asked for help, ECOWAS was simply too feeble to assist them in their fight against jihadist insurgents. It's a remarkably stark critique. It highlights the perceived weakness of these regional bodies, and it deeply, deeply complicates any future effort to present a unified transnational military front. Which brings us to our final thought for today. From the incredibly granular debates over local state police in Nigeria, up through the heavy burden of national terrorism trials, and all the way out to the fractured dreams of a West African standby force, we are witnessing a profound struggle over the very structure of safety. Can localized and regional security measures ever effectively replace centralized systems to truly guarantee stability in West Africa? It is a giant puzzle, and the outcome will literally define the future of the region. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. I really hope this helped map out all the moving